Elena Martinez had never asked for much. All she wanted was to finish medical school, help her mother get better, and maybe, just maybe, have a little breathing room in a life that felt like it was always one missed payment away from falling apart. At 22, she already carried the kind of tiredness that settled deep in the bones, the kind no amount of coffee could fix. She worked 3 jobs, tutoring first-year biology students in the evenings, cleaning labs on weekends, and waiting tables at a small Italian cafe near campus during lunch breaks. Her shoes had holes, her phone was held together with tape, and her coat had seen better days, back when her father was still alive and money wasn't a constant shadow chasing her. Her mother lived in a small village outside Seville, in southern Spain. She'd been sick for over a year now, first a persistent cough, then shortness of breath, then the diagnosis: pulmonary fibrosis. The treatment wasn't cheap, and Spain's public healthcare system, while good, couldn't cover everything she needed. Elena sent money home every month, even if it meant skipping meals or walking miles instead of taking the bus. She never complained. Not out loud anyway, but sometimes late at night in her tiny rented room above a laundromat, she'd stare at the ceiling and wonder how much longer she could keep this up. Then came the invitation. It arrived in her university mailbox, tucked between a flyer for a mental health workshop and a notice about overdue library fines. Thick cream-colored paper, embossed lettering, sealed with a wax stamp. "You are cordially invited to the Kensington Foundation annual gala," it read. Elena almost threw it away. She had no dress, no time, and certainly no money for a taxi to some fancy hotel. But then she saw the fine print. All final-year students in the Faculty of Medicine are encouraged to attend. Complimentary transport and attire provided. She hesitated, but the thought of a free meal, and maybe a chance to network with doctors or donors who could help with her mother's treatment, made her say yes. The night of the gala, she stood in front of a full-length mirror in a borrowed black dress that fit surprisingly well, thanks to the university's wardrobe assistance program. Her hair was pinned back simply, her makeup minimal, just enough to look presentable. She didn't recognize herself. For a moment, she looked like someone who belonged in a world of crystal chandeliers and string quartets, not someone who counted coins to afford bus fare. The gala was held at the Grand Kensington Hotel, a place Elena had only ever seen from the outside, usually while rushing past with a stack of textbooks under her arm. Inside, it was all marble floors, soft lighting, and people speaking in low, confident voices. She felt like an imposter, but she kept her head high, remembering her mother's words. "Mija, you belong anywhere your mind takes you." She stayed near the edges, sipping water, listening more than speaking. That's when she noticed him. He was older, much older, sitting alone at a small table near the terrace doors. Silver hair, sharp suit, but his eyes were kind. He wasn't surrounded by admirers or assistants like the other wealthy guests. He just watched the room quietly, like he was observing a play he'd seen many times before. Elena didn't know who he was until a professor leaned over and whispered, "That's Arthur Kensington, founder of Viridian Systems. He basically built half the digital infrastructure in Europe." Elena nodded politely but didn't stare. Still, something about his stillness drew her. Later, when she accidentally knocked over a glass of sparkling water near his table, she rushed to clean it up, flustered and apologizing. Instead of annoyance, he smiled. "No harm done," he said, his voice calm with a slight British accent. "In fact, I was hoping someone would come talk to me. Everyone else seems too busy pretending they don't want my money." She laughed, nervously at first, then genuinely. They talked, not about tech or investments, but about books. About her mother's illness, about how hard it was to study when you were always worried about someone you loved. He listened. Really listened. Not like he was humoring her, but like her words mattered. Before she left that night, he handed her a plain white envelope. "For your mother," he said simply. "Consider it a scholarship supplement." Inside was a check, not a small one, enough to cover 3 months of her mother's treatment. Elena's hands shook. She tried to refuse, but he just said, "Let someone help you for once. You've earned it." She cried on the bus ride home, not from sadness, but from the sheer relief of not having to choose between textbooks and medicine that week. After that, he reached out. Not with grand gestures, but quiet ones. He invited her for coffee, just coffee, at a quiet cafe near campus. He asked about her studies, her dreams, her fears. He never mentioned money unless she brought it up. And when she did, he offered solutions without making her feel small. He paid her tuition for the semester. He arranged for her mother to be seen by a specialist in Madrid. He even sent a care package to her village: nutritious food, warm blankets, a new oxygen concentrator. Each time he said the same thing: "I'm investing in you. Not because I expect anything back, but because the world needs more people like you." Elena didn't trust it at first. No one was this generous without wanting something. But weeks passed and he never asked for favors, never made her uncomfortable, never even held her hand without asking. He was respectful, gentle, lonely, maybe, but never pushy. Then, one rainy afternoon in late November, he met her after her anatomy lecture. He looked older than usual, more tired. They walked through the campus gardens, leaves swirling around their feet. "I've been thinking," he began, stopping beneath a bare oak tree. "My time isn't what it used to be, and I've spent most of my life building things. Companies, systems, legacies. But I've never built a family. My children, well, they see me as a bank account, not a father." Elena stayed quiet, sensing this was bigger than small talk. "I know this sounds sudden," he continued, "but I'd like to ask you something serious." He took a deep breath. "Would you consider marrying me?" She froze, not because she was shocked, though she was, but because the question came wrapped in such honesty, not arrogance. "It wouldn't be what people think," he added quickly. "No expectations. No pressure. I'd provide for you and your mother completely. Medical care, housing, your education, whatever you need. In return, I'd just like someone to share my days with, someone real, someone who sees me, not my net worth." He wasn't asking for romance. He was asking for companionship, for dignity in his final years. Elena thought of her mother struggling to breathe, of her own exhaustion, of the mountain of debt waiting after graduation. She thought of the kindness he'd shown her. Consistent, quiet, never demanding. She didn't love him, but she respected him, and in that moment love felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. After a long silence, she said, "Why me?" "Because you're not afraid of hard things," he replied. "And because you still have hope, even when life gives you every reason to lose it." A week later, they stood in a small civil registry office. No guests, no flowers, just the two of them and a clerk who barely looked up from his desk. Elena wore a simple navy dress. Arthur wore a dark suit and a faint smile. They signed the papers. It was over in 10 minutes. As they stepped outside into the gray London afternoon, he turned to her. "You don't have to move in right away," he said gently. "Take your time." But Elena shook her head. "No," she said. "Let's start now." She didn't know it yet, but that decision would change everything. The drive to his home, an estate in the Cotswolds she'd only seen in photos, was quiet. She stared out the window at the rolling hills, the stone cottages, the sheep dotting the fields like scattered cotton. It felt like another planet. When they arrived, the house was even grander than she imagined. Ivy-covered stone, tall windows, a garden that looked like it belonged in a novel. Staff waited at the door, discreet, polite, not intrusive. Her room was larger than her entire apartment back in the city. Silk curtains, a fireplace, a view of the lake. It was beautiful, but it felt empty. That first night she lay in bed listening to the silence. No traffic, no neighbors arguing, no dripping faucet, just wind in the trees. She missed the noise of her old life, the chaos, the struggle, the feeling that every day was a fight she was winning, even if just by an inch. Arthur kept his word. He gave her space. They had dinner together most nights. Simple meals, good conversation. He told stories about building his first computer in a garage, about losing his wife decades ago, about the loneliness of success. She told him about growing up in Spain, about her father's love for gardening, about why she wanted to be a doctor. They weren't husband and wife in the traditional sense. More like two people sharing a fragile truce with fate. A week passed. 7 days of adjusting, of learning routines, of trying not to feel like a guest in a museum. On the 8th morning, Elena woke early. Arthur was already up, working in his study. She made tea and decided to bring him a cup. She knocked lightly, but there was no answer. The door was slightly ajar. She pushed it open. "Arthur? I brought—" The words died in her throat. He wasn't at his desk. He was slumped in an armchair by the window, pale, sweating, clutching his chest. His breathing was shallow, uneven. "Arthur." She dropped the cup. It shattered on the floor and rushed to him. He tried to speak but only managed a weak gasp. His eyes were wide with fear. Elena's medical training kicked in instantly. She checked his pulse, rapid, thready. "Skin clammy. Signs of acute distress. Call an ambulance." She yelled to the hallway, though no one was there. She fumbled for her phone, hands shaking, and dialed 999. While waiting, she helped him lie down, loosened his collar, kept talking to him in a calm voice. "You're going to be okay. Help is coming." But as she looked around the room, desperate for his medical information, her eyes landed on a drawer in his desk, slightly open. Inside, among papers and pens, was a manila folder with his name on it. She didn't want to snoop. But if he had a known condition, heart disease, diabetes, allergies, it could save his life. With trembling hands, she pulled it out. The top document was a letter from a private hospital in Zurich. Date: 3 weeks before their wedding. Diagnosis: Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Prognosis: 4 to 6 months with aggressive treatment. Patient declined chemotherapy, opted for palliative care only. Elena's breath caught. He knew. He knew he was dying when he asked her to marry him. The ambulance sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. But in that moment, all Elena could hear was the pounding of her own heart, and the terrible, dawning realization that everything she thought she understood about this marriage was wrong. She looked down at Arthur, now barely conscious, his face ashen. The man who had offered her security, who had saved her mother, who had treated her with nothing but kindness, had also hidden the truth. And now, in the quiet of his study, with tea cooling on the floor and glass shards glittering like broken promises, Elena had to decide. Was this a betrayal? Or something else entirely? She didn't have an answer yet. But as the paramedics burst through the door, shouting questions, she gently closed the folder and tucked it back into the drawer. For now, he was still her husband, and she was still a doctor, and that was enough. The ambulance ride to the private hospital felt endless. Rain tapped against the windows, blurring the green countryside into streaks of gray and gold. Inside, the paramedics worked quickly but calmly, attaching monitors, checking vitals, speaking in low, practiced tones. She sat beside him, holding his hand, cold and thin, and tried to steady her own breathing. She kept replaying the last week in her head. The quiet dinners, the way he'd asked about her day like it truly mattered, the gentle way he'd shown her around the estate, pointing out the rose garden his late wife had planted, the library where he read every night. None of it had felt like a lie. But now, with that medical file burning in her memory, everything felt uncertain. At the hospital, a sleek, modern building tucked into the hills, doctors took over immediately. She wasn't family by blood, but she was his legal wife, and they let her stay. For hours, she paced the waiting room, clutching a paper cup of terrible coffee, jumping every time a door opened. Finally, a doctor in a crisp white coat approached. He was older, with kind eyes and a calm voice. "He's stable," he said gently. "It was a panic episode worsened by pain and fatigue. Not a heart attack, thankfully, but his body is under tremendous stress." She nodded, relief washing over her. But it was short-lived. "The cancer is progressing faster than we'd hoped," the doctor continued. "He's refusing further intervention. He's made it clear comfort care only. No hospitals unless absolutely necessary." She swallowed. "He didn't tell me." The doctor studied her for a long moment. "He doesn't tell many people. Not even his children. You're the first person he's allowed this close in years." That night, they brought him back to the estate in a medical car. He was weak, barely able to walk, but insisted on being home. "Hospitals smell like endings," he whispered as she helped him into bed. "I'd rather be where the birds still sing." Over the next few days, Elena barely slept. She stayed by his side, reading to him when he couldn't sleep, adjusting his pillows, making sure his pain medication was on schedule. The staff, discreet, efficient, handled the rest, but she wanted to do this herself. It felt like the only honest thing left. And then, on the 4th morning after the episode, he asked to talk. They sat in the sunroom, wrapped in blankets, steam rising from their mugs of herbal tea. Outside, frost glittered on the grass, and a pair of swans glided across the lake. He looked older, fragile like old paper, but his eyes were clear. I owe you an explanation, he said quietly. She didn't interrupt, just listened. I knew about the diagnosis before I asked you to marry me, he began. I'd been to Zurich, to Mayo Clinic, to specialists in Tokyo. They all said the same thing, it's terminal, no cure. Maybe 6 months if I'm lucky. He paused, sipping his tea with a shaky hand. I didn't ask you to marry me out of manipulation, he said, meeting her gaze. I asked because I was tired of being alone. And because I saw something in you, something rare. You care about people, not possessions. You work hard not for glory, but because it's right. I needed someone who wouldn't look at my fortune and see a prize, but a responsibility. She stayed silent, her heart pounding. My children, he continued, voice heavy. They've been circling like vultures since the diagnosis. They don't care about the clinics I built in Ghana or the clean water projects in Nepal. They want yachts, art collections, control of the board. If I die without a clear plan, they'll dismantle everything I've tried to build for the greater good. He looked at her then, not as a billionaire, not as a dying man, but as someone pleading. I chose you because I believed you'd protect that legacy. Not for me, for the people who depend on it. She finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. You could have just hired a lawyer, or named a foundation. I could have, he admitted. But a foundation can be sued, redirected, corrupted. A person with integrity? That's harder to break, and you've already proven yours. She thought of her mother, now breathing easier thanks to his help, of the medical students he'd quietly funded, of the villages that had clean water because of his quiet donations. It wasn't about him. It never really was, but why marriage? She asked. Why not just ask me to be an advisor? A friend? He smiled faintly. Because the law doesn't listen to friends, but it listens to spouses, especially when the will is contested. My children will fight. They'll say I was mentally unfit. They'll drag your name through the mud. But if you're my wife, if you've stood by me in these final months, it becomes much harder for them to win. He reached into his robe pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. This is a prenuptial agreement, he said. It includes a full annulment clause. If you walk away today, you'll receive a lump sum. Enough to finish school, care for your mother, start your life without debt. No strings, no obligations. He placed it on the table between them. Or he said, you stay. Not as a wife in the traditional sense, never that unless you want it, but as my partner in this final act. You'll inherit control of the Kensington Global Trust. Billions, yes, but tied to strict ethical guidelines. You'll have a team to help you, but the final say is yours. You'll decide where the money goes, who it helps, how my life's work continues. He leaned back, exhausted from the effort of speaking. I won't ask you to decide now, he said. Take the night. Take the week. But know this. Whatever you choose, I'm grateful you came into my life. She didn't sleep that night. She walked the halls of the estate, past oil paintings and antique clocks, past rooms she'd never entered. She thought about her old life, the laundromat apartment, the bus rides, the constant worry. She thought about the future, becoming a doctor, maybe opening a clinic in her village, living quietly, free of debt. But she also thought about the little girl in Kenya she'd read about in one of his foundation reports, cured of malaria because of a mobile clinic he funded. About the midwife in Nepal who now had solar-powered equipment because of his grant. About the ripple effect of one person choosing to do good with what they have. By dawn, she knew her answer. She found him in the library, wrapped in a blanket. Staring at the fire, I'm staying, she said. He didn't smile, just nodded as if he'd known all along. Then we have work to do, he said. The next few weeks became a blur of learning. He introduced her to his closest advisors, his longtime CFO, a sharp woman in her 50s who'd been with him since the company's early days, his personal lawyer, calm and meticulous, and the head of his foundation, a former doctor who'd left practice to run global health programs. At first, they were cautious with her, polite but distant. She didn't blame them. To them, she was a student, barely out of her teens, who'd married their dying boss. They waited to see if she'd crumble or run or demand luxury, but she surprised them. She asked questions, real ones, not about yachts or stock prices, but about impact metrics, supply chains for medical supplies, how to ensure funds reach the ground level without corruption. She spent evenings reading reports, cross-referencing data, even calling field workers in Uganda to understand their challenges. Slowly, Their skepticism turned to respect. Meanwhile, Arthur grew weaker. Some days he could barely get out of bed, but on the good days they'd sit in the garden and he'd tell her stories, not just about business but about failure, about the times he'd lost everything and had to start over, about the guilt of missing his children's childhoods because he was chasing success, about how in the end, none of it mattered except the lives you touched. One afternoon as they watched the swans glide across the lake, he said, "You remind me of my wife. She had your fire, your quiet strength." Elena didn't know what to say. "I'm not trying to replace her." "You're not," he said softly. "You're becoming your own kind of light." Then came the phone call. It was his eldest son. Cold-clipped voice. "I hear you're playing house with some student," he said. "Don't think we won't contest the will." "You're being used," Elena didn't argue. Just said, "I'm here because I choose to be." She hung up and told Arthur. He sighed. "They'll try to scare you. Don't let them." But the call left her shaken. That night she called her mother. "Mama," she said in Spanish, voice trembling slightly. "Am I doing the right thing?" Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then, "Mija, when you were little, you once gave your only pair of shoes to a boy who had none. I scolded you. You got blisters walking home. But you said his feet hurt more than mine. That's who you've always been. If this path lets you heal more feet, then walk it." Elena cried that night, not from fear but from clarity. As winter deepened, Arthur's good days grew fewer, but on one rare sunny morning he insisted on going to London. "One last meeting," he said. They went to the Foundation's headquarters, a sleek glass building near the Thames. In the boardroom he stood, unsteady but proud, and introduced her to the full board of directors. "This is my wife," he said, voice firm despite its weakness. "And my chosen successor. From this day forward she speaks with my voice." Some board members exchanged glances. Others nodded respectfully. One man, tall, silver-haired, clearly one of the sons, stood abruptly. "This is absurd," he said. "She's a child. She doesn't understand the scale of what's at stake." Arthur turned to him, eyes blazing with a fire no one expected from a dying man. "She understands more than you ever will, because she cares about people, not power." The room fell silent. After the meeting, as they rode back in the car, Arthur leaned his head against the window, exhausted. "You did well," he murmured. "I was terrified," she admitted. "Good," he said with a faint smile. "Fear means you respect the weight of it." Back at the estate, the staff began treating her differently, not with more deference but with quiet trust. The housekeeper started leaving her favorite tea by her desk. The gardener showed her how to prune the roses. The chef asked what dishes reminded her of home and began cooking them. She wasn't just the wife anymore. She was becoming part of the place. One evening, while sorting through Arthur's study, organizing files, digitizing old records, she found a photo. It was him, decades younger, standing beside a woman with warm eyes and a bright smile. On the back, in faded ink, "Clara, 1982, building our first clinic together." She stared at it for a long time. Then she placed it on the mantel in the library where he could see it every day. He noticed it the next morning. His eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," he whispered. She didn't say anything, just squeezed his hand. As February turned to March, the days grew longer, but Arthur grew thinner. He spent most of his time in bed now, but his mind was sharp. They talked less about business and more about life, about forgiveness, about what comes after. One night, during a rare sleepless stretch, he asked her, "Are you afraid?" "Of what?" she asked. "Of being alone with all this. Of failing." She thought for a moment. "I'm more afraid of not trying," he smiled. "That's my girl." A week later, he took a turn, fever, confusion. The doctor came, gave him something to ease the pain, and left with a quiet look that said everything. Elena stayed by his side, reading to him from a book of poetry he loved. Outside, the first buds of spring appeared on the trees. He drifted in and out of sleep. Once he opened his eyes and looked at her with startling clarity. "You were never my wife," he said softly. "You're my legacy." And then he closed his eyes again. She held his hand until his breathing slowed, and stopped. The house fell silent. For a long time she just sat there, tears streaming down her face, not just for him, but for the strange, unexpected bond they'd formed. Not love, not in the way people imagine it, but something deeper. Trust, purpose, a shared mission. When she finally stood, her legs were stiff, her heart heavy but not broken, because she knew what came next, and she was ready. The funeral was quiet, just as he'd wanted. No grand cathedral, no rows of black cars, no speeches from politicians or CEOs, just a small stone chapel in the village near his estate, surrounded by bare trees in the soft hush of early spring. A handful of people came. His oldest friends, a few foundation staff, the doctor who'd cared for him in his final weeks. His children showed up late, stood in the back with stiff faces, and left before the flowers were even placed on the casket. She didn't speak to them. She didn't need to. Afterward, she walked alone through the garden he'd loved, past the roses just beginning to bloom, down to the edge of the lake where the swans still glided in slow circles. The air smelled of damp earth and new growth. She felt hollow, not just from grief, but from the sudden weight of everything that now rested on her shoulders. He was gone, and the world he'd built, billions of pounds, global projects, thousands of lives depending on decisions she'd have to make, was now hers to carry. Back at the estate, the silence felt heavier. Rooms that once held his quiet presence now echoed with absence. She avoided his study for 2 days, unable to face the desk where he'd signed papers, read reports, whispered his last words. But on the third morning, she walked in, closed the door behind her, and sat down. It was time. The will was read a week later in the same London law office where they'd signed their marriage papers. His children were there, 3 of them, all in expensive suits, all radiating impatience. The lawyer, calm and gray-haired, read the document aloud in a steady voice. Most of it was standard: properties, art collections, personal effects. But then came the key clause. I leave full control of the Kensington Global Trust, including all assets, voting rights and executive authority, to my wife, with the explicit instruction that its mission remain focused on ethical, sustainable, and community-led health initiatives worldwide. This decision is final, non-negotiable, and protected under Clause 17B of the Kensington Foundation Charter. One of the sons scoffed. She's been married to him for 6 weeks. This is coercion. The lawyer didn't flinch. Medical and psychological evaluations confirm Mr. Kensington was of sound mind at the time of signing. Furthermore, witness testimony, including from his personal physician and 2 independent notaries, supports the validity of this document. They left without another word, but she saw the look in their eyes. This wasn't over. True to their word, they filed a legal challenge 2 weeks later. Undue influence, they claimed. Emotional manipulation of a vulnerable, terminally ill man. The tabloids picked it up. Headlines screamed, "Student inherits billionaire's empire. Did she exploit him?" And widow or wolf in sheep's clothing? She didn't read the articles. She couldn't. But she heard the whispers, at the bank, in meetings, even from strangers who recognized her from grainy photos online. She kept her head down, focused on work. Her first move was simple. She called a meeting with the foundation's leadership team, the CFO, the head of programs, the legal advisor. She didn't sit at the head of the table like she owned it. She sat in the same chair she'd used during her first visit, notebook open, pen ready. "I'm not here to change everything," she said. "I'm here to protect what he built. But I need your honesty. Not your loyalty to his memory. Your honesty about what's working, what's broken, and where we're failing the people we're supposed to serve." They were quiet at first. Then the head of programs, a woman who'd run clinics in war zones, leaned forward. "We're strong in emergency response," she said, "but weak in long-term care. We drop in, fix a crisis, leave. The communities are grateful, but they're still fragile." The CFO added, "And our overhead is too high. Too many consultants, too much travel. We could redirect 15% of admin costs straight to the field." She listened, took notes, asked questions. By the end of the meeting, they weren't just staff anymore. They were allies. Her second move was personal. She flew to Madrid to see her mother. Not as a billionaire's widow, but as herself, wearing the same coat she'd worn to the gala, carrying a small suitcase. Her mother hugged her tight, eyes wet. "You look tired," she said. "I am," Elena admitted. "But I'm also clear." She told her everything, the legal fight, the doubt, the fear that she wasn't enough. Her mother listened. then made her a cup of strong chamomile tea and said, "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be true." That night, lying in her childhood bed, she made a decision. She wouldn't hide. She wouldn't let them paint her as a gold digger. She'd show them who she really was, not through press releases, but through action. Back in London, she did something unexpected. She sold the penthouse Arthur kept in the city, not because she needed the money, but because it felt wrong to live in luxury while people slept in tents. She moved into a modest flat near the foundation office, close to public transport, near a park where kids played after school. She kept the estate, it was tied to the trust, but only used it for official meetings or when hosting visiting partners from the field. Then she made her boldest move yet. She flew to Nairobi. Not with a security detail or a PR team, just her, a backpack, and a local contact from the foundation's Kenya office. She spent 10 days visiting mobile clinics in rural villages, watching nurses treat malaria, helping unpack vaccine shipments, sitting with mothers waiting in line for prenatal care. She didn't introduce herself as the head of the trust. She just said she was here to learn. People opened up to her. They told her about broken refrigeration units, about medicine running out, about walking miles to reach the nearest clinic. She listened, took notes, cried quietly in the back of a Land Rover one night after hearing a grandmother describe losing 3 grandchildren to preventable diseases. When she returned to London, she called an emergency board meeting. "We're changing our model," she announced. "Starting next quarter, 80% of new funding goes directly to local health workers, hiring them, training them, equipping them. We're not the heroes, they are. We're just the support." Some board members resisted. "It's too risky," one said. "Local teams might lack oversight." "Then we build better oversight. With them, not over them," she replied. "Trust isn't given from a boardroom. It's earned on the ground." She won the vote. Barely, but she won. Meanwhile, the legal battle dragged on. Depositions, court dates, endless paperwork. His children hired aggressive lawyers who dug into her past, her jobs, her debts, her university records, trying to find proof of manipulation. They found nothing. Just a hardworking student who'd said yes to an impossible offer. The judge dismissed the case 3 months after Arthur's death. No evidence of coercion, the ruling stated. The deceased made a clear, informed choice. The plaintiff's claims appear motivated by financial interest, not concern for their father's well-being. She didn't celebrate. She just felt relief, like a storm had finally passed. But the real test came next. A major donor, one of Arthur's oldest friends, called her into his office. He was in his 80s, sharp as a tack, worth more than most countries. "I supported Arthur for 40 years, he said, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey. "But I need to know, are you in this for the mission? Or the money?" She didn't reach for the glass. "If I wanted money, I'd have taken the annulment and disappeared. I stayed because I believe in what this foundation can do, not what it's done, but what it could do." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. Because I'm doubling my annual gift, but only if you lead the new maternal health initiative yourself. On the ground. Not from a desk," she agreed without hesitation. That summer she traveled to Nepal. Monsoon season had just begun, turning dirt roads into rivers of mud. She stayed in a small guest house near a mountain clinic, waking at dawn to help set up vaccination tents, translating for local doctors. Her Spanish didn't help, but her basic medical knowledge did, and learning Nepali phrases from the nurses. One evening, after a long day treating children with respiratory infections, an elderly midwife took her hand. "You're not like the others," the woman said through a translator. "You don't take photos for your website. You just help." Elena smiled. "I'm trying to learn." "You already know," the midwife replied. "Your heart is here." Those words stayed with her. Back in London, she launched the Hands-On Health Initiative, shifting power, funding, and decision-making to local teams in every country the foundation operated in. She cut executive bonuses, redirected funds to field stipends, and insisted that every report include direct quotes from community members, not just data points. Critics called it naive. "You can't run a billion-pound trust like a charity bake sale," one financial columnist wrote. But the results spoke louder. Vaccination rates rose. Maternal deaths dropped. Staff retention improved because local workers finally felt respected. not used. And slowly, the narrative began to shift. A documentary filmmaker, someone who'd covered humanitarian crises for decades, reached out. "I've seen a lot of philanthropy that's really just ego," she said. "But what you're doing, it's different. Can I follow you for a few months?" Elena agreed, but only if the film focused on the communities, not her. The resulting short film, Rooted, premiered at a small human rights festival. It showed nurses in Ghana repairing ultrasound machines with duct tape, mothers in Bangladesh teaching hygiene to neighbors, a teen in Guatemala training as a community health worker. Elena appeared in only 2 scenes, once handing out supplies, once listening to a village elder. But her presence was felt in every frame, in the trust, the respect, the quiet partnership. After the screening, a young woman approached her, eyes shining. "I'm studying public health," she said. "I want to work like you do." Elena hugged her. "Then start where you are, with who you have, with what you know." That night, she called her mother. "I think I'm getting it right," she said. Her mother laughed softly. "You always were, mija. You just needed to believe it." As autumn returned, so did the weight of leadership. New crises emerged, a cholera outbreak in Yemen, a dengue surge in the Philippines. She worked late into the night, reviewing proposals, approving emergency funds, writing personal notes to field staff. But she also made time for herself. She ran in the park every morning. She cooked simple meals. She kept a journal, not of finances but of moments. A child's laugh in a Nairobi clinic, the smell of rain in the Himalayas, the way the swans returned to the lake each spring. She never remarried. Not because she was waiting, but because she'd found a different kind of love. The love of purpose, of service, of building something that outlasts you. One evening, while sorting through old foundation archives, she found a letter Arthur had written her but never sent. It was dated the day before he died. "If you're reading this, I'm gone. And you're still standing. That's all I ever wanted to know. Don't carry my name like a burden. Carry it like a seed. Plant it where it's needed. And when you doubt yourself, remember, you were chosen not for what you had, but for who you are. A." She folded the letter carefully and placed it in her desk drawer, the same one where she'd found his diagnosis months ago. Now, it held not secrets but strength. She walked to the window and looked out at the lake. The swans were there, gliding side by side. The first stars appeared in the twilight sky. She wasn't just his widow anymore, she was her own woman, and her work had only just begun. 2 years had passed since the funeral, and the world had changed, not just outside, but inside her. The woman who once counted coins for bus fare now walked through airport terminals with purpose, not panic. She still wore simple clothes, still drank tea from the same chipped mug she'd brought from her student days, but there was a quiet steadiness in her step now. People noticed it, not because she demanded attention, but because she gave it, fully, patiently, to whoever stood in front of her. The foundation had changed too. Under her leadership, it had shifted from a top-down operation run by distant executives to a network of local leaders who made real decisions about real needs. She'd insisted on it. "We don't know what a mother in rural Malawi needs," she'd told the board during one heated meeting. "She does. So let's listen to her." And they did. Now, instead of flying in with fancy reports and pre-packed solutions, foundation teams arrived with open ears and empty notebooks. They asked questions. They stayed longer. They hired local staff, not just as assistants but as directors. And slowly the results spoke for themselves. Fewer empty clinics, more trained midwives, cleaner water, stronger trust. But success brought new challenges. One rainy Tuesday in Geneva, she sat across from a group of international health officials. They were polite, well-dressed, used to speaking in acronyms and policy jargon. They praised her work, remarkable impact, innovative model. But their eyes held a question. Can you scale this? She knew what they meant. They wanted her to turn the foundation into a global brand. More offices, bigger budgets, glossy campaigns. They wanted efficiency. She wanted dignity. "I'm not interested in scaling for the sake of size," she said gently. "I'm interested in deepening impact. One village at a time." They nodded, but she saw the doubt. To them, slow was weak. Small was insignificant. Later that night, alone in her hotel room, she stared at the ceiling and wondered if she was being foolish. Maybe she should play the game. Hire PR firms, give TED Talks, build a personal brand. It would make fundraising easier. It would silence the critics who still whispered that she was just lucky. But then she remembered the midwife in Nepal who'd held her hand and said, "Your heart is here." That wasn't about branding. That was about presence. She made a decision then. She wouldn't chase scale. She'd chase truth. Back in London, she gathered her closest team, the CFO, the head of programs, the young field coordinator from Ghana who'd risen quickly through the ranks. "I want to do something different," she said. "Something that puts our values front and center." She proposed renaming the foundation's flagship program. Not after Arthur, not after herself, but after the people it served. "What if we call it the Hands That Heal?" she suggested. "Because it's not about who funds it. It's about who does the healing." They loved it. Within weeks, signs went up at clinics from Bangladesh to Bolivia. The Hands That Heal, a Kensington initiative. Local staff designed the logos. Some used handprints, others woven patterns. One even featured children's drawings of nurses. The press noticed. Not the tabloids this time, but serious journalists. A feature in a major global health magazine called it "The Quiet Revolution in Philanthropy." For once, the story wasn't about her. It was about Maria, a community health worker in Guatemala who'd reduced infant mortality in her region by 40%. About Kwame, a young pharmacist in Ghana who'd built a solar-powered medicine fridge from scrap parts. She read those stories and felt a warmth she hadn't known before. Not pride, exactly, but peace. Then came the call from Spain. Her mother's voice was weak but clear. "Mija, the new clinic in our village. They named a wing after you." Elena's breath caught. "What?" "No, Mama, that wasn't the deal." "They didn't ask you," her mother said, laughing softly. "They did it because you made it happen. You sent the funds, yes, but you also came. You sat with Abuela Rosa when she was sick. You played with the children. You remembered their names." Elena closed her eyes. She had visited. Just once, quietly, after the first round of funding went through. She'd helped paint the waiting room, shared lunch with the staff, held babies while mothers filled out forms. She hadn't thought anyone would notice. But they had. That weekend, she flew home. The village hadn't changed much. Narrow streets, whitewashed houses, the smell of orange blossoms in the air. But the old health post, once crumbling and understaffed, was now a bright, clean clinic with running water, an ultrasound machine, and a small pharmacy. Children ran up to her, shy at first, then grinning when she greeted them by name. The local doctor, a woman in her 30s who'd returned from medical school in Madrid, hugged her tightly. "You gave us more than money," she said. "You gave us hope that someone out there sees us." Elena stayed for 3 days. She didn't give speeches. She just helped, organizing supplies, listening to patients, sharing stories over dinner with her mother and neighbors. On her last night, the village threw a small gathering. No speeches, just music, food, and laughter under the stars. An elderly man leaning on a cane approached her. "My granddaughter is studying nursing now," he said. "Because of you," she shook her head. "Because of her," he smiled. "But you made the path possible." She flew back to London with a heart full of something she couldn't name. Gratitude, maybe, or belonging. Back at the office, a new crisis awaited. A devastating flood in Pakistan had wiped out entire villages, including several clinics the foundation supported. She didn't hesitate. Within hours, emergency funds were released, supply chains activated, and field teams dispatched. Not just from London, but from nearby countries already in the network. She didn't go herself this time. She'd learned that leadership wasn't always about being on the ground. Sometimes it was about trusting others to lead. But she did something else. She called every major donor personally, not to ask for money, but to share stories. Not statistics, but voices. She played a recording of a nurse in Sindh describing how she'd carried vaccines on her back through knee-deep water to reach a stranded family. She sent photos, not of destruction, but of resilience. A makeshift clinic under a tarp. Children drawing pictures of doctors as heroes. Donations poured in, not because of guilt, but because of connection. Meanwhile, the legal ghosts hadn't fully disappeared. Arthur's children still sent letters, cold, formal, questioning budget decisions, demanding audits. She responded to each one calmly with full transparency. She even invited them to visit a project site. None ever came. One day, the eldest son showed up unannounced at the London office. She was in the middle of a video call with a team in Kenya, but she ended it and met him in the lobby. He looked older, tired, less angry, more lost. "I read the report from Nepal," he said quietly. "The one about the maternal deaths dropping by half." She nodded. "I never understood what he saw in you," he admitted. "But maybe I see it now." She didn't gloat. Didn't say, "I told you so." She just said, "He wanted you to be part of this too. He left you shares in the company, not the trust. He hoped you'd use them to build something of your own." He was silent for a long time. Then, "I've been chasing his approval my whole life, even after he was gone." "You don't need his approval," she said gently. "You just need to find your own purpose." He left without another word. But a month later, she heard he'd started a small tech incubator for students from underfunded schools. She smiled when she read the news. As winter approached, she faced her biggest test yet. A major global health organization offered to merge with the foundation. Their resources were vast: government ties, massive infrastructure, worldwide reach. Together, their director said, "We could double your impact in 5 years." It was tempting, so tempting, but something felt off. During negotiations, she noticed they kept referring to beneficiaries, not partners. They wanted to rebrand everything under their name. They spoke of efficiency gains that sounded like staff cuts. She asked to visit one of their flagship projects, a large hospital in Southeast Asia. What she saw troubled her. Clean, yes. Well-funded, yes, but cold. Patients moved through like numbers. Local staff weren't allowed to make decisions. Everything flowed from headquarters. That night, she called her team. "What do we stand for?" she asked. "Local leadership," said the Ghanaian coordinator. "Dignity over speed," said the CFO. "People, not profits," said the head of programs. She nodded. "Then we say no." They were shocked. "But the resources mean nothing if we lose our soul," she replied. She turned down the offer. Publicly, in a short, clear statement. "We believe real change grows from the ground up, not the top down. We will continue to walk alongside communities, not above them." The backlash was swift. Critics called her naive. "Sentimental idealism," one headline read. "How long can she survive without scale?" But something unexpected happened. Smaller organizations, grassroots groups, local NGOs, community collectives reached out. "We've been watching," one wrote. "You're the only big player who treats us like equals. Can we partner?" She said yes. Within a year, the foundation wasn't bigger, but it was deeper, more connected, more trusted. And then came the invitation she never expected. Her old university, the one with the laundromat apartment and the borrowed dress, asked her to give the commencement speech for the medical school. She almost said no. She didn't feel like a role model. She still made mistakes and still doubted herself, still cried after tough days. But then she remembered the student she'd been. Exhausted, scared, wondering if she'd ever catch a break. So she said yes, on a bright June morning. She stood on the same campus where she'd once rushed between jobs, now wearing a simple navy dress, no jewelry, no entourage. The students clapped politely. Some recognized her from the news. Others just saw a young woman who looked like she could be their older sister. She didn't talk about billions. Didn't mention Arthur. Didn't boast about achievements. She told them about the first time she held a stethoscope, about failing her first anatomy quiz, about crying in a hospital hallway because she couldn't afford her mother's medicine. "I didn't become who I am because I got lucky," she said, voice steady. "I became who I am because I never stopped believing that kindness is a form of strength, and that showing up, even when you're scared, is the bravest thing you can do." She paused, looking out at the sea of young faces. "Wealth didn't change me," she said, "but responsibility did. And sometimes the most unexpected choices lead us exactly where we're meant to be." After the speech, students lined up to talk to her, not for selfies, but for advice. One young woman, eyes red from crying, whispered, "I'm working 2 jobs and I don't know if I can finish." Elena hugged her. "You will. And when you do, come find me. We'll build something together." As she walked away from the campus that day, she didn't feel like a billionaire's widow. She felt like herself, and that was enough. Later that week, she boarded a plane, not to a boardroom but to Kenya. A new children's wing was opening at a hospital the foundation had helped rebuild. She'd been invited to cut the ribbon, but when she arrived, she didn't bring scissors. She brought paintbrushes, because the children had asked if she'd help them finish the mural on the wall, a bright, joyful scene of doctors, nurses, and kids holding hands under a rainbow. She rolled up her sleeves, dipped a brush in blue, and painted the sky. Around her, children laughed, nurses smiled, and the sun shone warm on her back. No cameras, no speeches, just hands working together. And in that moment she knew this was the legacy worth building. Not in boardrooms or bank accounts, but here in the quiet, everyday act of caring. She wasn't just carrying Arthur's dream, she was living her own. 5 years had passed since the day she signed those marriage papers in a quiet government office, never imagining where that single choice would lead. Now standing on the sun-baked earth of a small village in western Kenya, she watched children run barefoot across a freshly swept courtyard, their laughter rising like birdsong into the clear blue sky. Around her, the new pediatric wing of the Kibwezi Community Health Center hummed with life. Nurses in crisp uniforms checking charts, mothers rocking babies in shaded waiting areas, solar panels glinting on the roof. It wasn't grand by city standards, but here it was everything. She hadn't come for a ribbon cutting or a photo op. She'd come because she'd promised. 2 years ago, during a visit to assess water sanitation needs, a little girl named Amina, no older than 6, had tugged her sleeve and asked, "Will you come back when the new room for sick children is built?" She'd knelt down, looked the girl in the eyes, and said, "I will," and she always kept her promises. Now, Amina was 10, taller, her smile missing a front tooth, and she ran up to her with a handmade card. "You came," she said, beaming. "Of course I did," she replied, crouching to hug her. "You built something beautiful here. I just helped carry the bricks, that was the truth of it." She hadn't built this alone. No one ever does. The real builders were the local nurses who worked double shifts, the village elders who donated land, the mothers who formed a health committee and learned to spot early signs of malaria. She'd simply made sure they had what they needed, funds, training, trust, and then stepped back. Back in London, the foundation had grown, but not in the way most expected. It hadn't become a global empire with offices in every capital. Instead, it had become a quiet network, a web of partnerships stretching across continents, all rooted in the same belief that the people closest to the problem are the ones best equipped to solve it. She'd fought hard to keep it that way, turning down lucrative offers, resisting pressure to professionalize in ways that would strip away local voice, and slowly others began to follow. Even some of the big players started shifting their models, not because they admired her, but because the results were undeniable. Her mother, now fully recovered and stronger than ever, had moved back to their village in Spain, but not to retire. She'd started volunteering with the local clinic, teaching young mothers about nutrition, organizing community health days. Sometimes they'd video call and her mother would show her photos of the garden she'd planted behind the clinic, tomatoes, herbs, even a small patch of sunflowers. "For joy," she'd say. "Every healing place needs a little joy." She smiled every time she heard that. Life hadn't been easy. There were still sleepless nights, budget shortfalls, political unrest in regions where they worked, moments of doubt when she wondered if she was doing enough. But she'd learned to sit with the uncertainty, to let it pass like a storm. What kept her grounded wasn't the money or the title, but the faces. The midwife in Nepal who now trained others, the teen in Guatemala who'd become the first in her village to study medicine, the grandmother in Ghana who'd started a clean water co-op with her neighbors. These were her compass. She still lived simply. Her flat in London was modest, filled with books, plants, and photos from the field. Not of her, but of the people she worked alongside. She didn't own a car. She took the bus or walked. She cooked her own meals, mended her clothes, and saved receipts like she still had to account for every pound. Old habits, she supposed. But they reminded her who she was and who she wasn't. She wasn't a celebrity. She avoided interviews unless they centered the communities. She never posted on social media. When a magazine once called her the billionaire's conscience, she wrote them a polite letter asking them to stop. I'm not his conscience, she said. I'm my own person doing my best. That honesty over time became her reputation. Now as she walked through the new wing in Kibwezi, she paused by a small plaque near the entrance. It read, "The Martinez Fund for Children by Communities." She hadn't wanted her name on it, but the village council insisted. "You gave us more than money," the chairwoman had said. "You gave us belief. Let us honor that." She'd agreed, but only if the name reflected purpose, not person. Hence, the Martinez Fund, not after her, but after the idea that healing begins with care, and care begins with showing up. Later that afternoon, she sat under a mango tree with the clinic's head nurse sharing tea from a thermos. They talked about staffing needs, vaccine supply chains, the upcoming rainy season, practical things. But then the nurse grew quiet. "People ask me," she said softly, "how someone with so much could care so deeply about a place like this." She stirred her tea, thinking. "It's not about how much I have," she replied. "It's about how much I've been given. My mother taught me that. And Arthur? He showed me that wealth is only meaningful when it's shared." The nurse nodded. "You never acted like you were above us." "I never felt like I was," she said honestly. "I still don't." As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and rose, she prepared to leave. Amina ran up again, this time holding a small woven bracelet. "For you," she said. "To remember us." She slipped it onto her wrist. It was rough, imperfect, made from local grass and red thread. She would wear it every day. Back in Nairobi that night, before her flight to Geneva for a global health summit, she opened her laptop. Not to check emails, but to write. Every week she sent a short note to the Foundation's entire network, staff, partners, volunteers. No jargon, no corporate speak. Just a reflection, a thank you. A reminder of why they do what they do. Tonight, she wrote, "Today, I watched a little girl run into a clinic not because she was sick, but because she knew it was a safe place, and that's the world we're building. Not with headlines. Not with billions, but with trust, one village at a time. Thank you for walking this path with me." She hit send, closed the laptop, and looked out the hotel window at the city lights below. Somewhere out there, in 100 different places, people were doing the real work, the quiet daily acts of care that change lives. She was just one thread in a much larger tapestry. The next morning in Geneva, she sat at a round table with ministers, CEOs, and UN officials. They spoke of strategic alignment and impact metrics. She listened, then leaned forward. "I've learned something," she said. "You can't measure hope in percentages. You can't scale compassion like software. Real change happens in moments. When a mother feels heard, when a child gets medicine on time, when a community believes it has a future." Silence followed. Then one minister nodded slowly. "We've been so focused on the machine we forgot the heart," she smiled. "Then let's put it back." After the meeting, a young delegate from Bangladesh approached her, eyes wide. "I've read your field reports," she said. "They're the only ones that feel human." "Because they are," she replied. "Never lose that." That evening, instead of attending the gala dinner, she took a walk along Lake Geneva. The air was cool, the water calm. She thought about the journey. The laundromat apartment, the gala, the diagnosis, the funeral, the courtrooms, the villages, the quiet victories. None of it had gone the way she'd planned. But maybe that was the point. Life rarely does. She'd once thought security meant money. Now she knew it meant purpose, belonging. The certainty that your life matters because it lifts others. When she returned to London, there was a letter waiting on her desk. Not from a lawyer or a donor, but from a school in rural Malawi. The children had drawn pictures of doctors, nurses, and a woman with dark hair and kind eyes. Her. On the back, in careful handwriting, "Thank you for helping us dream." She pinned it to her office wall, right next to the photo of Arthur and his late wife in front of their first clinic. She didn't live in the past, but she honored it. A few weeks later, she received an unexpected visitor. It was Arthur's youngest daughter, the one who'd never spoken to her, never attended the funeral. She was in her 40s now, with tired eyes and a quiet demeanor. "I've been watching what you've done," she said, sitting across from her in the sunroom at the estate, the same room where Arthur had first told her the truth. "I thought you'd turn it into a vanity project. But you didn't. I couldn't," she replied. "It was never mine to take. Only to steward," the woman nodded. "I'd like to get involved. Not for the money, just To understand what he believed in, she didn't hesitate. Start in the field. Spend a month in Ghana. Work alongside the team. See what it's really about? The woman agreed. And 3 months later, she sent a letter, not from a boardroom, but from a village clinic, saying she'd finally understood her father's choice. That same year, the foundation launched a new scholarship program. Full medical training for students from underserved communities, with a commitment to return and serve their home regions. The first recipient was a young man from Kibwezi, the brother of Amina. He wrote her a letter before leaving for university. I will come back, and I will build another wing. She cried when she read it, not from sadness. From fullness, time moved on. Seasons changed. She turned 30, then 31. She never married. Not because she was closed off, but because she'd found a different kind of partnership with the world, with her work, with the quiet joy of knowing she was exactly where she was meant to be. One spring morning, she stood again in the garden of the Cotswolds estate. The roses were blooming, the swans were back on the lake, and the air smelled of rain and earth. She wasn't there for business. She was there to remember. She walked to the library where Arthur's favorite chair still sat by the fire. She ran a hand over the armrest, then opened the drawer, the same one where she'd found the diagnosis years ago. Inside, she placed a new folder. It held the latest impact report from Kenya, a photo of Amina in school uniform, and a note from her mother. You made your father proud. She closed the drawer gently, then she turned and walked outside into the light. Later that day, she boarded a plane, not to a summit or a meeting, but to Spa.